Hello and welcome to Module 3 of the speaking course. And this module is all about everything you need to know about speaking part 1. Okay, so let's look at what we're going to do today. So in this module, we're going to look at something I call speaking part 0, the format of speaking part 1 and what to expect. We're going to look at common topics, why some people mess this part up and how to avoid this. And we're also going to look at how to develop our answers. And finally, we're going to look at preparation. So in the last module, we learned about the 4 marking criteria that examiners use to mark your test. We broke each of these 4 down into simple language, and we found out exactly what you need to do and what you should not do in order to get a band 7 or 8 or even 9. And the differences between a band 7 and 8 for each of the 4 criteria. Now, that module in particular is extremely important. If you didn't watch that module, please go back. I know I say this for every module, but module 2 is probably the most important. You're not going to understand everything that you're going to hear in the next 10 modules if you don't understand that one. So please go back and have a look at that one if you haven't already. Okay, so what is speaking part 0? This is the part when you meet the examiner before the actual test begins. So part 1 begins whenever they start asking you questions, but there are 4 questions that they're going to ask you before the actual test begins. Now, first impressions should not count, but they really do. Now, first impressions means what the examiner thinks about you as soon as they see you or as soon as they hear you. Now, speaking part 0 does not count towards your mark. And there's nothing in the marking scheme, nothing in the marking criteria which says that your performance in speaking part 0 contributes to your overall mark. However, I spoke to a number of examiners about this, and senior examiners and examiner auditors and stuff like that. First impressions do seem to have an effect on scores a little bit. Now, does it affect scores a lot? No, but some people are, they're not quite a 6, they're not quite a 7, they're in between a 6 and a 7, or in between a 7 or an 8 for a particular thing, and this might sway your mark. So it's always a good idea just to create a good first impression. Remember that the examiner is doing a job and is a human being. Don't worry if they don't seem very friendly. Now, lots of people that I've spoken to, lots of students say, I didn't do very well because the examiner put me off. The examiner didn't seem friendly and I got really nervous. You have to remember that this is the examiner's job, and not all of them love their job. And like people in my course are the reason why I like to teach people at a band 7, 8, 9 level is because those people, you can interact with them. They're easy to understand. Most people doing the test aren't at your level. Most people are kind of band 5, band 6 level, and listening to people at band 5 and band 6 can get quite tiring. So you might be the 20th person that the examiner has spoken to that day, and they're not going to be really bubbly and really friendly to you. That doesn't mean that they don't like you. That just means that the person is doing their job and they might be tired. So in speaking part 0, if the examiner comes across as a bit unfriendly, don't get nervous, don't get stressed out. It's just who they are and the situation they're in, not you. You will not be marked officially on this part of the test, but it is worth knowing what to expect. So what can you expect in part 0? So part 0 questions, there are 4 questions. First question, what's your full name? Okay, so I've made a mistake there. They won't ask you what's your full name, they'll ask you what's your full name. So let's just correct that. Sorry about that. What's your full name? And just say my name's, and then say your name clearly. You're not being judged on fluency or pronunciation or anything like that, but it's just don't say my name is blah, 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 blah. If your name is in a different language to English and you say it really quickly, it will be very difficult for the examiner to understand. So just say my name's and say your name clearly. What can I call you? Just say you can call me. Now, if you have an English name, you can use your English name, but most of the time this will just be your first name or your nickname. If you have like a really, really complicated, strange name or a name that's difficult to pronounce, you probably, from going to English classes and interacting with English-speaking people, you probably have a name that is easy to pronounce. So just tell them that one. Where are you from? Just say I'm from wherever you're from, and don't ask the examiner where they're from. Don't be asking the examiner any questions at this stage. Lots of times the examiner, I will say, where are you from? And the person will say, I'm from Ho Chi Minh City. Where are you from? And then it's kind of awkward because you can't get into a conversation with the person and say, oh, I'm from Ireland and blah, blah, blah. You just won't be able to do that. So don't ask them. And then the examiner will say, can I see your ID, please? And all you have to do is just say, sure, here you are. And don't speak while they're checking it. It's pretty annoying when you're trying to check someone's details and the person is talking or asking questions. So this is the only thing you need to do. My name's blah, blah, blah. You can call me blah. I'm from blah. And sure, here you are. And that's it. So this is the end of part 0. And now we're ready to begin part 1. Now we're ready to begin the actual test. So part 1 format, what can we expect in part 1? It will last around 4 to 5 minutes. 4 to 5 because it depends on your answers. If you answer the questions properly, there should be 3 topics. So they'll ask you about 3 different topics and there will be about 3 or 4 questions for each topic. It's normally around 12 questions. I say normally because some people give very short answers and some people give extremely long answers. But if you answer the questions properly, it should be around 12 questions over 3 topics. And your first topic will either be work or study or your hometown. So this will always be the first one. The examiners are told to ask about one of these in the first round of questions. So you'll be asked 3 or 4 questions about work if you work, or 3 or 4 questions about study if you study, or 3 or 4 questions about hometown. So what are the common topics for speaking part 1? 3 most common topics are work, study, hometown, or your home. The reason why these are the most common are these are the ones that the examiners have to ask. So as I've already said, the first questions will be about work or study or your hometown, your home. So does this mean that you should prepare answers for these questions? Absolutely not. Do not prepare answers for these. Don't memorize answers for these. The examiners can spot this, and it's really, really obvious when somebody has memorized an answer, because the rest of your answers which aren't memorized are not going to be so good. So just answer these naturally. So you'll only be asked about one of these. You'll only be asked about work or study or hometown or home. So again, no need to memorize any answers. The other 2 topics will be about you. This means that they can ask you anything about you. So it could be about your family, your free time. It could be something really strange like your favorite color. It could be your, photographs, TV, books, holidays, whether you wear a hat or not. It could be something really strange or something mundane. I've analysed hundreds of past tests and there are no common topics. So if you see somebody or if you see a teacher or you see a website or a book that says these are the top 10 common topics for speaking, they don't know what they're talking about. I literally sat down with hundreds and hundreds of past papers and I tried to identify any common topics. And apart from those three at the top, work, study, hometown, your home, you have no idea what you're going to get. So don't be preparing answers based on that. So why did I say that there were common topics? There are no common topics. I really want to emphasize that, because a big mistake would be for you to prepare certain topics and expect them to come up. There are hundreds of topics which could come up, and there's no way that you can prepare hundreds of topics. So it's impossible to predict what you will be asked. And the questions are about you, so it's impossible to get them wrong. So I'll say this again. The questions are about you, so it's impossible to get them wrong. Don't overthink these questions. Remember, the examiner just wants to know what you think. They want to know about you. So there is no correct answer or wrong answer. All they want to know is, so do you wear a hat? They just want to know whether you wear a hat or not. They don't want to know the definitive answer on hats or people wearing hats. They just want to know what you think about that. So don't overthink them too much. So why do some people mess up part one? From doing hundreds and thousands of speaking tests, here are the most common reasons why people mess this up. They prepare memorized answers. So it is extremely obvious when somebody memorizes an answer. How can we tell? You can just tell straight away by the amount of detail and the intonation and the sentence stress and everything. And just the whole thing, you can tell it's a memorized answer, especially when you compare it with a more unusual question that you ask them. So a trick that the examiners will do is, if they suspect that you are giving them a memorized answer, they'll ask you an unusual question. A question that I try and trick people with is, what color do you think reflects your personality? Now, that is a question that people definitely haven't prepared. And what happens is they will have given you a memorized answer, and then you'll ask them that. And what they'll do is, I don't know, pink, and it's a terrible answer. And if you memorize answers, you'll get a band 0. They give very short answers. Do not give one-word answers or, very, very short answers. If they ask you, do you work or do you study? Don't say, I work, or don't say, I study. If they say, where's your hometown? Don't say, my hometown is Belfast. That's a very, very short answer. But do not give very long answers. I don't know why, but this was very common when I worked in Vietnam. When you ask somebody, tell me about your hometown, they would tell you for about 4 to 5 minutes about their hometown. They would tell you about the architecture, about the history, about the traffic, about absolutely everything. That is not how a natural conversation works. Remember that the part one should just be like small talk between two people. If somebody asked you, tell me about your hometown, you would not talk for 5 minutes. They think too much about the answers. So remember that these are questions about you. You can't get them wrong. There are no marks for task achievement or task response. There are no marks for the content of your answers. All you have to do is just answer the questions because they are about you. If you overthink these, what happens? Your fluency goes down and you lose marks for fluency and coherence. So try not to overthink them. And they get stuck when they get an unusual topic or question. So I always ask people, what's your favorite color? What color do you like in nature? And people go, oh, I've never heard that before. But again, if I say to you, what's your favorite color? That's an unusual question, but you could say pink, black, blue, purple. I don't have one. I have lots of them. It doesn't really matter what you say as long as you say something that's fluent, the grammar is correct, the vocabulary is correct, and the pronunciation is clear. As long as you're doing that, it doesn't matter what you say. So please don't say, I don't know, I've never heard, never thought about that before. I don't really, don't say something like that. Just give an answer. They seem like they don't care or don't want to be there. So again, there's no marks. There's nothing in the marking criteria which says you have to care. But it creates a very, very bad impression. I was speaking to someone last week, and it was obvious that their partner was forcing them to do a speaking test with me. They didn't really want to be there, and it just created a really bad rapport between the both of us. And it was obvious that, you know, they didn't want to be there, and it's kind of wasting my time and wasting their time. You know, and it also affects your intonation. If you don't want to be there, you are going to have a very flat, you're going to speak with a very flat tone, and it will also mean that your fluency and coherence is not so good, because you won't really give very long answers. You tend to give quite short answers. They're so nervous that they can't perform properly. So part one is when people are most nervous, I find. As people go through the test, they kind of become less nervous. But in the beginning, some people can be very, very nervous. Like, you ask them simple questions. You know, why do you like your job? What do you not like about your job? What job would you like to do in the future? Really simple questions, and they find it very difficult to answer because they are so nervous. And they talk to the examiner like a recording device. Now, this is true for most students. They don't speak to the examiner like the examiner is a human being. They talk to the examiner like they are a human recording device. And we're going to talk about on the next slide why that's a problem. So, how can you avoid all of these things? So, answer the questions naturally and spontaneously. So don't prepare memorized answers, just answer them as you would normally. If you were in, let's say, an English class, and normally in an English class, in the first couple of days, the first couple of classes, the teacher just gets you to talk to each other, you know, ask each other about, get to know each other. Or if you were on a date, or if you just met a new colleague, and they asked you simple questions like, what do you do in your free time? You wouldn't you wouldn't really give a memorized answer. You just answer them spontaneously. So try to do that. The more natural and the more spontaneous your answers, the more fluent and better they'll be. Develop your answers appropriately. So don't be giving very short answers. For part, we're going to talk about this more, but for part one, 2 or 3 sentences is more than enough. So not too long, not too short. So, and also don't be giving a speech. You know, if somebody asks you, describe your hometown, don't talk for 5 minutes. You know, 2 or 3 sentences for part one is all that's really required. Remember, these questions are about you, so there is no need to think deeply about the answers. So if I ask you something really simple like, what did you do last weekend? You do not need to really think deeply about, like, oh, what did I do in the morning, and then in the afternoon, what did I do? You know, I don't expect you to give me every single thing that you did last weekend. Just say whatever comes into your mind. There's no way that you can get these wrong because they're about you. So don't be thinking very, very deeply. If you think very deeply and you think very hard about the answers to these questions, your fluency is going to go down. And expect the unexpected. Part one, what happens a lot is students think that it's going to be hometown, family, work or study, and something like free time or something like that. And then when you ask them about hats or about photography or about their favorite colors, they stumble. They don't do very well because they didn't expect it. So if you expect difficult questions and you deal with them well, you do much better than the other people. and pretend like you care. Pretend, I know that it's a IELTS test. I know that it's not the best experience you're ever going to have, and it's just something that you want to get done. But for those 15 minutes, pretend like you want to be in the room. It will create a good first impression, and it will also mean that you're forthcoming with your answers and your pronunciation is good. I know that it might take a lot for you to do that, but pretend that you're an actor or an actress for 15 minutes and pretend like you care. And take this as an opportunity to relax and get into a groove. Now, what do I mean by that? Part 1, you're going to be judged on the whole test. So your speaking is going to be judged on the test as a whole. But part 2 and part 3, to be honest, are more important. So take part 1. I'm not saying that part 1 is not important, because it is, but take part 1 as a chance to get relaxed. To relax and get into the groove means to get into a rhythm so that you become more and more relaxed in part 2 and part 3. It's a natural human thing that when the 10 minutes before you start your test, when you're sitting outside the room, you're going to be very, very nervous. And when you walk into the room, you're going to probably be extremely nervous. But when you sit down and you start answering the questions, the nerves and the stress are going to dissipate. They're going to go away a bit by bit. So try and aim that by the end of part 1, you're very relaxed and you're happy to answer questions. And also treat the examiner like a human being. The best, like band 8, band 9 students, it feels like you're talking to a colleague or a friend or someone you just met in a coffee shop or some sort of social interaction. It doesn't feel like an exam. So if you treat the examiner like a human recording device, it's going to feel and sound, you're going to sound like a robot. But if you talk to them on a human level, then everything will be much better. And do that even if they're really unfriendly. Unfortunately, there is a range of friendliness when it comes to IELTS examiners, just like there's a range of, with anybody or with any profession. Some of them will be really nice, some of them will not. Some of them will be horrible. There'll be a small percentage of them who will be extremely nice and a small percentage of them who will be extremely unfriendly. Most of them will kind of be somewhere in the middle. But even if the person is quite unfriendly, try and be nice to them. Just pretend you're speaking to a friend. So, key skill, develop your answer. We're going to talk a little bit more now about how to develop your answer. Okay. So one of the big mistakes students make in part 1 is giving very short answers. However, developing your answer does not mean talking as much as possible. Your answers should be not too short and not too long. One word or phrases is obviously too short. If you're including more than 3 sentences, I think this is probably too long. So we've already mentioned all of this, but I just wanted to reiterate it to make sure that you understand before we move on to looking at all of these different ways to develop your answer. A very simple way to make sure that you develop your answers is to simply answer the question and then add an extra piece of information. If you do this, you'll be sure to follow the not too short, not too long rule. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at adding these extra pieces of information. So extra information number 1 is just giving explanations. This is the most obvious way to add extra information, and we can do it simply by adding a word like because. Now, the words that we're going to discuss now are very, very simple. You do not need to overcomplicate these. This is not IELTS writing where you need to use, cohesive devices or linking words that are, academic or high level. When you're speaking, you don't use those type of words. We're just going to use simple words. Example, how often do you read? So a bad answer would be, I read every night before bed. Why is this bad? It's just too simple. Or not too simple, sorry about that, too short. A better answer would be, I read every night before bed because I find it difficult to get to sleep and reading fiction relaxes me and switches off my brain. So what I've done is I've extended the answer, I've developed the answer by simply putting in because and then a reason, an explanation. So that's one way that you could develop your answers. The second way is by contrasting information. And we do this by simply using a word like but or although. Again, two very simple words. Example, do you read every night? A bad answer would be, I normally read Monday to Friday. So again, too short. So a better answer would be, I normally read Monday to Friday, but at the weekend I tend not to read at all because I go out on Saturday and Sunday night with friends and I'm not in the mood to read when I come home. So that is a much more developed, you've added extra detail by using a 3-letter word, but very, very simple. Extra info 3, combine details. Very simply, we combine two things by adding the word and. Now again, extremely simple but extremely effective. Do you read every night? Bad answer, I normally read Monday to Friday. Better answer, I normally read Monday to Friday and I also like to read during the day on Saturday and Sunday, as those are my days off and I have more free time to relax. So I've just added in extra information by using the word and. Very, very simple. Extra info 4, past comparisons. So this is when we use the phrase used to compare the past and the present or the future. Example, do you read every night? Not anymore. Bad answer. Better answer, I used to read all the time, but since I became a father, all of my time is spent looking after the new baby, so I don't have time. So again, you can see how I've used the phrase used to compare what I used to do in the past and then bring the examiner up to what is happening in the present. Extra info 5, talking about the future. So we use will or be going to talk about the future. Example, do you read every night? Bad answer, not at the moment, maybe in the future. So, you're not giving the examiner enough to work with there. But a better answer would be, not at the moment, but I'll definitely try to read more next year when I have more free time in the evenings. And probably the most common way we can add extra information is just to give examples. An easy way to develop your answers is to add an example. Do you read every night? Yes, I do. Not a very good answer. Better answer would be, yes, I do. Like last week, I got into a really good book called XYZ, and I couldn't wait to get into bed each night and read it. Now, I haven't used for example, or for instance, or something like that, because that's a little bit too formal and academic. Now, for example, you could use that in the test, but the word like, is what most English speakers use whenever they are talking, well, where I'm from anyway. And it's just a simpler way to say that. So as you can see, I've just added in my book. I don't read a book called XYZ. If you see XYZ, that's just me showing a random example. Okay, so extra information 7, frequency. You can use words like usually, never, always, and more often than not to extend your answers. So you can talk about how frequently you do something. So advanced tip, use one of the many frequency idioms. So there are lots and lots of idioms that talk about frequency. Example, do you read every night? No, not often. A better answer, once in a blue moon, I'd say, because I'm normally so tired by the time my head hits the pillow, I'm out like a light. So if you did this, the examiner would be really impressed because you've used an idiom there. Instead of not often, once in a blue moon kind of means rarely. And you can look up frequency idioms. If you Google frequency idioms, you'll find lots of them. And I often warn students about using idioms that they don't really understand. But frequency idioms are very easy to use because the examiner sets you up, because the examiner will say like, oh, how often do you do that? Or when you're thinking of an answer, it's quite easy to insert this and for it to sound natural and for you to get it correct. So preparation, how can you prepare for part 1? So you must talk to people. It's really, really obvious. And please, please, please don't just say, I've no one to talk to. I mean, that's just an excuse. If you actually put your mind to it, if you actually thought about the number of opportunities, both online and offline, there are to meet people and talk to them, you would actually find someone if you thought about it. Like I had one student who lived in a place where there were very few native English speakers, but there were a lot of tourists. So what she did was she went and got a job in the local Starbucks next to one of the tourist sites. And 90% of the people that went into that Starbucks spoke English. And what she did was she just made small talk with them. So small talk is just when when you first meet someone and you just ask them about their day, about how things are, talk about the weather, about their families, everyday things. So she just talked to people when she was serving them, and she really, really developed her speaking by doing that. Now, should you go and apply for a job in Starbucks? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is get creative with how you can, either offline or online. I mean, online, there are hundreds of thousands of places where you can look to get to be able to speak to either native English speakers or people like yourself trying to learn and trying to practice their speaking. I don't need to help you with that. It's pretty easy to use Google. Ask someone to ask you questions. So go and get the recent past papers. They don't even have to be recent. And with your mother, your brother, your partner, whoever, your friend, just get them to be the examiner, to play the role of the examiner and to ask you the questions. And Google, again, will help you out with those questions. And if you're really alone, and you're probably not, there are very few people in the world right now who don't have access to English speakers or people who want to practice English, then you should just look at the past papers and record yourself. So in review, what did we do in this lesson? We looked at speaking part 0 and the things to expect and why it's kind of important. Format of speaking part 1 and what to expect. We looked at the common topics. There aren't any. Why some people mess this part up and how to avoid this. So some do's and don'ts really we looked at. And kind of one of the key skills for part 1 is developing our answers. So not too short, not too long. And we looked at how we can prepare. In the next module, we're going to look at everything you need to know about part 2. Now, I have a very, very specific technique for people to use in part 2, so you definitely want to tune in to that module. So I'll see you again soon, and thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Hello and welcome to Module 4 of the IELTS speaking course. My name is Chris Pell, bringing you through Module 4. So Module 4 is my unique Part 2 strategy that solves all common problems and helps you get your best score. So what I've done is I've analysed hundreds of students that I've helped, and I've looked at what their problems are, and I've come up with one strategy that solves all of these problems and ensures that you get the best possible score. I mean, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a 9, but it guarantees that you will get the best possible score that you can get. Okay, so let's start. So in this module, we're going to look at the format of speaking part 2 and what to expect. Common issues, so the reasons why students don't get the scores that they need. My part 2 strategy, and finally how to prepare, how to use the strategy, how to practice using the strategy. And in the last module, we looked at speaking part 0, the format of speaking part 1, common topics for speaking part 1, why some people mess this part up and how to avoid it, and developing your answers. And finally, preparation. Now, if you haven't looked at this module, go back and look at it. Some teachers advise that part 1 doesn't matter. It does matter. It's very, very important. Is it as important as part 2 and part 3? Well, your mark is based on the whole exam. You're judged on your total performance. Most people and I would agree that part 2 and part 3 are a little bit more important, but it doesn't mean that part 1 is not important. So make sure that you get part 1 correct before moving on to part 2. Okay, so here is the part 2 format, and this is important even if you've done the test before and you're aware of it. Make sure you pay attention to this because it's really important for the strategy that I use. So the examiner will show you a cue card that looks something like this, and the important parts of this are: here is the general topic that you have to talk about. So this is the most important part here at the top, and it's always at the top of the cue card, and it could be on any topic, but the bit at the top, the first sentence, is the most important part. And then it says you should say, it's really important that you note the word should, and then there are normally 3 or 4 bullet points, normally 4. It will be normally 3 bullet points and then a last one, and it will tell you what to do for the last one. Now, it's really important that you understand that this is the same format for every single part 2 question. It doesn't change. The topic is obviously going to change. You're not going to get the same question as this one, but it will be the same format, and this allows us to develop the strategy. So just to reiterate, even if you've done the test before, what part 2 is, you will have 1 minute to prepare and you're allowed to take notes. So the examiner is going to show you the card, give you instructions and tell you to look at the card, and you're allowed to make a plan, and you can write as many notes as you want in 1 minute, or you can make no notes at all. It's up to you. I would advise you to make notes. And then you should speak for, the examiner will say, up to 2 minutes. So the examiner does not say speak for 2 minutes. The examiner says speak for up to 2 minutes. This is really important because some people, a common question that I get asked is, do I have to talk for exactly 2 minutes? No, you don't. You have to speak for up to 2 minutes. And the examiner is going to stop you. So again, a common question that I get from students is it okay that I just keep talking, or should I stop around the 2 minute mark? My advice is just keep talking until the examiner stops you. There is no way that the examiner is going to allow you to keep talking for 10 minutes because the examiner wants to go home. You remember that the examiner is doing a job, so they will stop you in and around 2 minutes. They won't stop you at exactly 2 minutes, but it will be maybe a little bit before or a little bit after. And they will normally ask you one follow-up question. So part of part 2 normally involves one follow-up question, and a follow-up question just means something related to the thing that you've already been talking about. So just one small question. So common topics, there aren't any. Okay, so again, if you are talking to a teacher, or you read on a website, or you read in a book, these are the common topics for part 2 speaking. They are either lying or they're stupid and they don't know what they're talking about. Okay, so I've analyzed hundreds of these, and maybe more than hundreds, and there just aren't any patterns. There aren't any things that you can anticipate. But there's no need to worry about that. Don't think that that is a negative thing at all. Remember that they, the examiner, want to know what you know about the topic, not an expert analysis of the cue card. So you can't know nothing about the topic. Now, this is really key. Some people see the cue card, and this happens to me every single day, well, Monday to Friday anyway, when I'm doing speaking tests with people. And what I do is I always ask the person after, how do you think that test went? And they always say to me, oh, I knew nothing about the part 2 topic. I know nothing about that. And my advice to them is always, well, are they expecting a, PhD level response? Are they expecting a university professor who specializes in that topic to give them a response? No, they want to know what you know about that topic. There are no marks for task response or task achievement, so the content of what you say is not as important as how you say it. So your pronunciation, your fluency, your grammar and vocabulary. So don't worry too much if you see something you think you don't know about. And most people who say they know nothing normally know quite a bit about the topic. I think this is kind of one of those things that what people do is they create an excuse that allows them to fail. What I mean by that is, in the IELTS test and in any test in life or just anything in life, what people do is they create excuses so that if they fail, they can blame something. So what the people do is they say, oh, I know nothing about that topic. And then if they get 6.5 or 6 or a lower score than they expected, they can blame it on not knowing the topic instead of blaming themselves. And this is one of these things. And what I normally do when I'm doing practice tests with people is I insert or I add topics that people normally think they know nothing about. So one of them is the law. I don't know whether you know this, but I used to be a lawyer, so I know, I'm not an expert in the law, but I was a lawyer about how long ago now? Nearly 10 years ago. And when I add in the topic of the law, people always say, oh, I know nothing about that. Well, if you knew nothing about the law, you would be arrested by the police every single day because you would break the law. You know more about that than you think. So if you see a topic you don't know, have confidence that you can deal with it. So why do people not do well? Let's look at the main reasons. So, there are many reasons why people don't do well, but these reasons cover 99% of the cases that I see. So the first one is they don't speak for the 2 minutes. So if you don't speak for up to 2 minutes, it is a big problem. Why is it a big problem? Because you're going to get a very low mark for fluency and coherence. The examiners think that you're not prepared to talk. So this is why I tell people just keep talking until the examiner stops you. And it's a big problem if, for example, you stopped before, say, 1 minute 40 or 1 minute 50 or something like that. If you stop before that, then you're risking getting a low mark for fluency and coherence. And another thing people do is, and this is true for very high level candidates who can write quickly, that are shocked when they get a low score for speaking, and they write very detailed notes during the 1 minute preparation time. And then what they do is they kind of read from their notes. And after you watch this video or pause this video, get a book and read out loud from a book. And you'll notice that you have very unnatural intonation, very unnatural fluency, very unnatural sentence stress and pronunciation, the high-level pronunciation features. Or if you remember when you were in school and maybe you had a teacher who asked you to read from a book, and the person would have a very strange way of talking. If you read from your notes during the 1 minute, you're not going to do so well. And a lot of people simply just run out of things to say. And what they do is they use the cue card and they look at the 4 bullet points and they go through the 4 bullet points, and after 50 seconds or 60 seconds, they've talked about each of the 4 bullet points. So they talk for about 15 seconds for each of them, maybe 20 seconds, and then they just don't know what to say next, and then it causes them to and then they hesitate, pause, repeat themselves, and it's not a good thing. A lot of people don't have a structure to their answers. So many people start off the first 30 seconds, 40 seconds talking quite freely, and their fluency seems very good, but then they don't really have a prepared structure, and everything is very disjointed, and it's difficult for the listener to kind of follow and understand what they're saying. So that can be a problem. and they think they know nothing about the topic, and we've already talked about that. So I've developed a strategy to overcome all of these problems. So most people think that. So let's have a look at the cue card again. Let's look at what most people think. And just to mention at the beginning of this, a couple of IELTS teachers that I've mentioned this to have even said to me, oh, surely that strategy is not allowed. I can assure you that I've spoken to very high level people within the IELTS community, and it is allowed. So don't worry if somebody tells you that this strategy isn't effective. So if we look at this is our general topic, okay? And these are the bullet points. So when you hear me talking about general topic, you know I'm talking about this top bit. When you hear me talking about bullet points, you know I'm talking about this. So what do most people think? Most people talk about the bullet points and the bullet points only. Most people think that you can only talk about this, then this, then this, then this. Now, is that okay? That is totally fine. If you want to do that there is no problem with that. If you feel confident that you can just use a cue card and follow the bullet points and speak fluently and coherently for 2 minutes, then no problem. However, most people find it very difficult to do that, and I have come up with a strategy that will help you with that. So what can you talk about? The bullet points, but also there are many other things that you could talk about. The key is that you must talk about this, so the general topic, but you can also talk about, you could introduce the topic, you could describe the thing, you could give your opinion, you could give examples, you could talk about the past, the present, the future, and anything else. As long as you are talking about the general topic at the top, the first sentence, it doesn't matter what you say. So you could give examples, your opinion, a description, past, present, future, absolutely anything. So before you knew this, if you are limiting yourself to the bullet points, then the problems that present themselves are you are going to maybe run out of time, run out of things to say, you might not have a very good structure, and you might be reading from the paper. This strategy and knowing this puts you ahead of most students, because most students don't know this. So what is the strategy in practice? So number one, you look at the cue card and then decide which of the bullet points you're comfortable talking about. So I am not saying, this strategy is not saying don't talk about the bullet points. What this strategy is saying is use the bullet points if you want, but you don't have to use them. You can use 2 of them. You could use 3 of them. You could use 1 of them. You could use 4 of them. It doesn't matter. But you can also talk about many other things as long as you're talking about the general topic. So I would pick the bullet points that you feel comfortable, that you think that you have enough information. Remember, you're going to have to make this decision very quickly. So if you see a bullet point and you think, oh, no problem, I can talk about that, then use that. If you see another bullet point and you think, oh, I can't really think of anything to say, then don't use that one. Add other things you are more comfortable talking about from the list provided on the last slide. So if you see the cue card and you see, say, 2 of the bullet points that you're very comfortable dealing with, but you also know this great example, say you have a personal story or just a general example, or you know that something is coming up in the future, or you have this thing that you could talk about that happened in the past related to this topic, then feel free to use that. Make short notes for a plan. Keep these brief. They are just prompts, okay? So do not write out full sentences. All you have to do is just make a very short plan, and then you look down at them whenever you need extra help. So you're not reading from a piece of paper. If you read from a piece of paper, then your speaking is very unnatural. So what you do is you use the list of bullet points and the list of ideas that I have given you to just prompt you. And use these prompts to give a fluent answer. If you don't need them, don't use them. So some people, about 20% of people that I share this strategy with, say to me, I was using your strategy, but I find it easier just to think of the bullet points in my head, and think of the suggestions that you made in my head and just talk naturally. And that works better for me. So if that works better for you, use that. So only, as I say, mark these down as prompts to give you a fluent answer. Don't worry if some of this is, confusing or going over your head at the moment. And what we're going to do is look at this strategy in action. So an example. So say I get this cue card, okay, and I look at this and describe something you own which is very important to you. Okay, so and I look at the bullet points and I'm not sure about any of them. Say I don't really, I only really want to say this one, and I don't feel comfortable talking about this one. I don't feel comfortable talking about this one, and I don't feel comfortable talking about this one. But there are a number of other things that I do feel comfortable about. I feel comfortable describing it. I feel comfortable giving my opinion about it. I know I can talk about the past. I can talk about how I got it. I can talk about how I use it right now. And I can give an example. So what I would do is I would just use this, and I would write this down. And I might write some very short notes beside each of these. So I would physically write these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet points down on a piece of paper, and I might write a couple of words here, and then I would use these to give a fluent answer. So let me get my stopwatch, because I don't have any examiner stopping me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my watch just to make sure that I don't mess this up. So let me start off with this. So introduce. So I'm going to do this. Introduce, then I'm going to describe it, then I'm going to give my opinion, talk about the past, present, and an example. Okay, so today I want to talk about my laptop. My laptop is an Asus, and it is something called an Ultrabook. So Ultrabooks are a laptop which is very portable, but it's also very powerful. So it has 8 gigabytes of RAM, it has a Intel i7 processor, and I think it has 1 terabyte of memory. So, in my opinion, personally, I think this is a perfect laptop for me, because I travel quite a bit, but I also do very intensive things, memory intensive and processor intensive things on the laptop. So personally, it works really, really well for me. So in the past, I had a MacBook, but the problem with the MacBook was it kept breaking all the time. I don't know why, but all the Apple laptops I've had in the past haven't been great, and what I did was I went and bought an Asus desktop, and it ran perfectly for about 2 years. So I trusted Asus, and I went and I bought an Asus laptop, and presently I use it every single day. I make Facebook Live videos, I make videos, I edit videos. It's great at rendering them. It's a really, really amazing piece of kit. For example, I'm making videos for an online course at the minute, and what I do is I have to make them, and I can plug in everything, all the microphones and everything. It records it, it works really well, and then it allows me to edit it. And then the best thing about it is rendering. Rendering is when you actually produce a video, and it takes a huge amount of RAM and processor speed, and it does it really, really well. So that's all I want to say about my Asus laptop. 1 minute 57 seconds. So I was looking at a clock when I was doing that, cheating a little bit, but I don't have an examiner telling me to stop. And the surprising thing about that was you have to talk quite a bit about each of these 6 things. And I think that if I only had these 4 things to talk about, I think I would have struggled a little bit. Even a native English speaker, if they are limited to these 4 things, their fluency and coherence might drop a little bit, because of it. You can't really think. You're searching for content. But because I had the 6 things, and not only did I have 6 things, which is 2 more than this here, I had 6 things that I was very, very comfortable talking about, and that just made the exercise much easier for me. So we also can structure our talk a lot better because of we know what we're going to talk about. Therefore, we know that we can use certain cohesive devices. And remember, cohesive devices, sometimes called linking words, are really just little signposts. It's like a little flag, a little signpost to the listener saying, I'm going to talk about this now. So let's look at how we could use cohesive devices. So introduce. Today I'm going to talk about, and you'll see that I have a contraction here, and I've used not going to, gonna, because that is connected speech. It's not slang or anything like that. It's just connected speech. It's the way real people talk. So this isn't a cohesive device per se, but it does indicate to the examiner, I'm going to introduce the topic. Description, we could say something like, to get into the details, we could say something like, as for the nitty gritty, or something like that, just something to indicate we're going to talk about the details. Your opinion. Personally, I'd have to say, lots of people would just use in my opinion. From working in Vietnam, and apologies to anyone who thinks I'm picking on the Vietnamese, I have a Vietnamese wife, so it's not that I'm criticizing the Vietnamese or anything like that, but in that country, people say in my opinion a lot. They start off nearly every opinion with in my opinion. It's your opinion, it's coming out of your mouth, so you don't really have to say that. You can say it if you want, but it's just, I've heard it so many times. So personally, I'd have to say that's a little bit better for me. Examples. You could use for example, for instance, but if you are being very mechanical and very robotic and for example, for instance, it's a little bit academic. The way people actually speak is they just say like this, like my Asus laptop. I hope I'm pronouncing the Asus. I think that's how it's pronounced, but it's Taiwanese, so I'm not an expert in the Taiwanese language or Chinese language, sorry. So it might be, it's spelled ASUS, so whatever. Past, a past structure depending on the situation. So this, there are many different ways you could say you could just say in the past, or back in 2014, or something like that. And present, at the moment, or presently, or something like that. And future, in the future, plus will or be going to talk about what you're going to do in the future. So, all of it, you'll probably know these already, and you have these within your language capability already, or something like them. Do you have to use all of these? Do you have to use them exactly? No. These are just to give you an idea of how you can structure, how you can indicate to the examiner, make the examiner's job a little bit easier. And for me, when I'm using this technique, using these helps me just think a little bit better. That's just personally, might not work for you, but it won't hurt either. So preparation, how can you prepare for part 2 using this technique? So this will not come easy to you immediately, and it does require practice. So because it's so different to a lot of the techniques and a lot of the things that you have been taught in the past, students normally have a lot of questions about this. If you do have a question about it, put it in the Facebook group, and the other students or myself will be able to help you out with it. But it does require a lot of practice. You will not be able to get this technique down. You won't be able to fully utilize it, be able to use it properly until you practice it quite a bit. Do not expect to just watch this and then immediately be able to do a part 2 perfectly. You need to practice this again and again. When you get the hang of this, it will be very easy for you to produce a 2-minute talk on any topic, so it is worth practicing. You simply find lots of part 2 questions and practice using this technique. Start slow and improve gradually. So what I would do in the beginning is, so you can go online and you can find hundreds of part 2 questions, real part 2 questions. Don't look at these, don't analyze them first. Make sure that when you're practicing, you're seeing them for the first time, just like it'll be in the real exam. And what I would do is, whenever you start doing it, I would give yourself quite a bit of time. So you could start, taking 3 minutes or 5 minutes to do your plan. You probably won't need 5 minutes, but start as slow as you like, and then you can have the cohesive devices beside you. You could have a bit of extra time to think, just as you're getting used to this. And then what you're going to do is you're going to slowly get faster and faster and faster until you can do it easily. You can plan it out in 1 minute and speak for 2 minutes without any problem. And if you do that, you will be successful, but it will take a little bit of time. And record yourself. This is really, really important. Most of us do not know the mistakes that we make. One of the things that I realized when I started making these videos, when I started making videos for IELTS Writing Academy back in 2016, was how many strange things that I say and strange things that I do with my voice and the noises that I make. Most people are just unaware of the things they do, and when you're learning a language, you are very unaware of a lot of grammar mistakes you're making, a lot of vocabulary mistakes, little fluency things, pronunciation things. So record yourself and listen back to it, and that's a great way to become aware of the mistakes that you're making and fix those mistakes. And the goal is to be able to talk for 2 minutes while only looking at notes for cues. So the goal is, the place where you want to be is, you could be shown any task 2 cue card. Part 2. I always get those mixed up. So if you hear me talking about task 2 in this speaking course, I mean part 2. I'm really sorry about that. It's just so many IELTS things going through my head at once. So the goal is that any part 2 card is that you can get that, and in 1 minute you will be able to easily plan out your answer, and then you can talk fluently and coherently for 2 minutes. That's where you should be going. That's where you should be getting at. Okay, so let's review what we did in this module. We looked at the format of speaking part 2 and what to expect. We looked at common issues. We looked at my part 2 strategy. And we looked at how to prepare. So if you didn't get all of that, it's worth going back and having a look, and then if you still don't understand certain things or you have questions, ask them in the Facebook group and we'll be able to help you out. But I think it's a pretty straightforward strategy. It's a pretty simple strategy, and it's really effective. This has saved so many people that I have dealt with who kept getting 6.5. They employed this strategy and it gave them so much confidence, and they impressed the examiners so much that they bumped up to the score that they need. So hope you've enjoyed that one, and next we'll be moving on to part 3, and the next module will be everything you need to know about part 3, and I hope to see you there. Thank you. Hello and welcome to Module 5 of the speaking course. My name is Chris Pell, of course, and I'll be taking you through this module. And in this module, we're going to look at everything you need to know about Part 3. So in this module, we're going to look at the format of Part 3. We're going to look at why most people don't do very well in this part and how to overcome these problems. We're going to look at the 7 most common types of questions. Now, this isn't topics, this is types of questions. So we're going to look at these. These are very, very important in order to do well in this part. And we're also going to look at how to fully develop and structure your answers. And then finally, we're going to look at how you can prepare for this part. Okay, so in the last module, we looked at the format of speaking part 2 and what to expect. We looked at common issues, and we looked at my part 2 strategy and also how to prepare. And I'm sure that you've already watched this very, very important module outlining my part 2 strategy. So make sure that you understand it fully, and then we can move on to this module. Okay, so what can we expect in speaking part 3? You will be asked questions relating to the same topic as part 2. So relating to means, linked to, but not exactly the same. So for example, you could be asked about the law in part 2, and that would mean that you would continue to be asked questions relating to the law, but that could mean questions about lawyers, questions about police, questions about the criminal justice system, questions about just law in general, international law, many different things that you could be asked. So don't expect it to be exactly the same, but it will be similar to the topic. And this will last about 4 to 5 minutes. So 4 to 5 minutes for part 1, and then 3 minutes in part 2, and then 4 to 5 minutes in part 3. The questions will be more abstract, i.e. they will be about ideas. They won't be about you. So in part 1, you were asked questions about you. So what do you do? What is your favorite thing? What do you think about this? In part 3, you will be asked to discuss more ideas. So an example would be, instead of saying something like, what is your favorite season, and you saying, my favorite season is summer, you would be asked a more abstract thing, like how does someone's mood change depending on the season? That's an idea that you would have to discuss, and it wouldn't be about you, it would be about the idea itself. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later in this module. And this part is designed to stretch your abilities to the limit. You will get difficult questions. Expect difficult questions. So remember that your whole speaking test is being judged. You won't be judged on one bad question. So lots of people, when I ask them at the end of the test, how do you think you did? So this isn't in the real test, but in practice tests I do with people, I say, how do you think you did? Oh, I got one question wrong, so I messed it all up. I probably got a band 5. No, you didn't. Just because you get one difficult question doesn't mean that you're automatically going to get a lower score. But what part 3 is designed to do is for the examiner to really see what your level is. So they're going to be stretching your vocabulary and your grammar and your fluency and your pronunciation to its absolute limit to see what is your real level. And one way they will do that is they will ask you increasingly difficult questions. So expect these difficult questions. So what are the main reasons why people don't do so well? What are the reasons why people mess this part up? So the first reason is they give short answers. So you might have remembered in the previous modules I talked about part 1, 2 or 3 sentences is more than enough. But 2 or 3 sentences for part 3 is too short. You're going to have to really develop your answers in this part, and we're going to look at how you can do that in more detail. And also, people just try to finish quickly. This is a natural human thing that people do, is when they're in a stressful situation and it's coming to an end, what they do is they just naturally, your brain wants you to finish this stressful situation. So what they do is they answer the questions really quickly, and they don't give much detail in the questions, just to try and hope that the examiner will say, well done, that's the end of the test. The examiner will just keep asking you questions. That's not the way it works. And people get stressed or upset when they get a question they don't know how to answer. So as I've already said, you will be getting strange questions. You will be getting difficult questions. You will be getting questions that require you to really think about them in order to give a good answer. If you get a question like this, the natural response is to go and then repeat yourself and give a very short answer, and then you'll do terribly for the rest of the test. This is not the way to go. The way to go is to accept that you're going to be getting a difficult question and deal with it appropriately, and we're going to discuss how you can do that. And they do not fully understand the question. So lots of people, when I ask them a question, they answer it in a completely different way than they should, and they answer the question completely wrong. And this isn't because the person is not intelligent or they don't know anything about the question. It's because they have not understood the question. And we're going to discuss that as well. And finally, they don't think about the actual question being asked. So what they do is they hear some keyword in the question and they just start talking generally about that keyword. They don't actually think about the sentence that has come out of the examiner's mouth and what that question is asking them to do. And we're going to also talk about that. So how to avoid these common issues? What can you do in order to mitigate all of these problems? So use my technique for extending your answers. Very, very simple. We're going to show you this in this module, how you can extend your answers and give very well developed answers. And treat this as the most important part and finish strong. Practice speaking for 15 minutes in English. Now, lots of people might go to an English class, or they might have English in work, or they might have, friends that are English speakers and they practice with them. But very few people are used to speaking for 15 minutes in a foreign language, and it's extremely tiring, mentally tiring. And when you combine that with the stress that comes with just being in an exam, your brain is not really ready to cope with this. So what you need to do is you need to get used to speaking for 15 minutes, even more, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, constantly. Practice getting someone to ask you questions and speaking for this length of time. And treat this as, this is the part of the exam where I'm going to make a real difference and finish really strong. I've known students who do a good part 1, good part 2, and then they start to lag in part 3 and they don't finish strong, and it does bring their marks down a little bit. So make sure this doesn't happen to you. Expect difficult questions and answer them as best you can. Now, if you get a difficult question, you have two choices. You can go into panic mode and just go, oh, I know nothing about this. I won't be able to answer this question. And then you get really upset and you give a terrible answer. Or you can just accept, this is a difficult question. The examiner is not going to change the question. I just have to give my best answer, and that's all that I can do. And I'm going to show you how to enhance your answer, how to give your best possible answer. But if you get a difficult question, just say to yourself, I have this question, it's part 3, this is what I'm expecting. There will be difficult questions, and I just answer it to the best of my ability. And in that way, you will remain calm and you will give a good answer. So ask the examiner questions if you don't understand. So this is linked to the previous point. So if you get a difficult question, you can ask the examiner questions, but you can only ask them 2 questions. And the 2 questions are, can you repeat the question, please? Or can you explain what that word means, please? So lots of people who I ask them the question and you can see it in their eyes that they didn't understand the question, and they don't know that they can ask me to repeat the question or explain what a word means. And if you do ask the examiner these 2 questions, and when you don't understand a question, it gives you a little bit more time to think, and it will make sure that you answer the question properly. So let's think of an example. If I asked you the question, can you think of one law that should be universal in every country in the world? So you might say, sorry, can you explain what the word universal means? And I say, yeah, okay, sorry. That it means that law is applied in every single country in the world. then you would think, oh, I know what that means now, and you could start answering that question properly. And that would be a better way than just sitting there and guessing the answer. And also be aware of the 7 most common types of questions and answer accordingly. And we're going to look at this in much more detail later on in this module. But I've identified, 7 types of question that you might get asked, and we'll look at them. And if you're aware of them, then you know what the examiner is trying to do and what the examiner expects. And get used to discussing ideas, not yourself, people, or events, ideas. So there's a saying, I can't remember it exactly, I'll try and paraphrase, but it's something like simple people discuss other people, people in the middle discuss events, and great people discuss ideas, or something like that. But it's not something that people do very often. People normally gossip, talk about themselves, talk about other people, or talk about, events that happened in their lives. Very rarely do people discuss these abstract ideas. So you might want to get used to discussing ideas a bit more, especially in English. So what are the 7 most common questions? First one is opinion. Second one, evaluation. 3, talking about the future. 4, cause and effect. 5, hypothetical. 6, compare and contrast. And 7, talking about the past. Now, will you be asked other questions? Quite possibly. But most of the questions will be under these, most of the questions will come under these 7. And what this does is this gives you a very big power over the examiner, because you know what the examiner is trying to do. So if the examiner asks you a question about the future, you know that they're testing whether you can use future structures. If they ask you a hypothetical question, they know that they're trying to test whether you can use conditional structures. If they're asking you to compare things, they're seeing whether you can make a comparison. If they ask your opinion, they want to see whether you can clearly do that. So when you understand what they're doing, then that allows you to react appropriately. So opinion. What is opinion? Very simply, you will be asked what you think about something. This is probably the most common one. An example, do you think that students should use ebooks? Okay, so it's asking for your opinion, but it's asking you to your opinion on an idea. The idea that students using ebooks is a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, so normally they'll say something like, "Do you think? What do you think about this?" It'll be very obvious that they are asking for your opinion. Evaluation is slightly different. You will be asked to comment on someone else's opinion. So they'll say something like, "Some people think that paper books are bad for the environment. Sorry about that. Do you agree?" So this is slightly different. It's not saying, "Do you think that paper books are bad for the environment?" It's saying, "Other people think this. Would you agree with them?" So it's slightly different, and you'd have to evaluate that opinion. You'd have to say, some people think this, some people think that, and I think this. So it's more like a discussion task 2 question in writing. Future. You'll be asked to speculate about what will happen in the future. Example, do you think people will read more books in the future? This is getting you to try to use future structures. Like, I think in the future people will, you're using the word will to show the future. I think in the future people will use more books or read more books. We don't use books, we read books. So it's just getting to see if you can use those future structures. Cause and effect. You may also be asked to discuss what has caused a certain situation and what effects this have. Kind of like a causes and solutions, or problems and solutions, or causes and effects question in task 2. You can see a trend here. They're more like task 2 writing questions than part 1, where it's just, everyday normal questions about you. And then part 2 was, you giving kind of a lecture. And then this one is more a discussion of ideas, the way, you might do in a tutorial in a university class or something like that. So example for cause, how do online retailers affect the types of books people buy? And effect, What effect does this have on the book market? So the first question is talking about the cause, and the second one is talking about the effect. Hypothetical, you'll be asked about an unreal or imaginary situation. So something that's not quite real. So an example would be, if you were a book publisher, what genre of books do you think would be most successful? So you are probably not a book publisher. It's an unreal situation or an imaginary situation that you are a book publisher, but they want you to use conditional structures, and if I were a book structure, or if I was a book publisher, I would say that thriller fiction would be the most successful, or something like that. And compare and contrast. Sorry about my performance today. I don't know what is the problem, but my brain doesn't seem to be working very well. Sorry about that, but I'll try my best. Just like you should in part 3. You will be asked to compare and or contrast 2 or more things. So do you believe ebooks or paper books are more suitable for students? So they're trying to get you to use comparisons. I think ebooks are more suitable than paper books, something like that. And finally, you'll be asked about how things were in the past or how things have changed from the past up until now. That's a useful distinction for you, because that will change the tense that you use. How has the way people purchase books changed in the last 25 years? So you would have to talk, in the last 25 years, the book market has changed significantly since people have started to buy online rather than go into traditional bookstores, something like that. Obviously you would add much more detail in that, but that's just showing you the structure that they're trying to get you to use for that one. Or they could ask you a question, 10 years ago, did you buy ebooks or paper books, or something like that. And the questions won't all be about books, by the way. This is just, I like to use the same type of question, the same topic, just to illustrate this. I think it's more effective. So grammar and functional language. So there is specific grammar and functional language for each of these types of questions. So I briefly talked about some of them, but we're going to go into far more detail. Knowing this type of grammar and functional language is key to answering this question correctly and confidently. So we've already talked about having an advantage over the examiner. So you know what the examiner wants you to do. So if they say, do you prefer ebooks or paper books? You know that they're seeing if you can use a comparison. So you might not have used comparisons yet in the test, or you might have made a slight mistake with a comparison in part 1 or something, or part 2, and they want to just test this out to see if you are capable of using it. And if you are aware of that, then you can clearly and confidently give them the comparison. For example, I think ebooks are far more are cheaper than paper books, therefore they're better, or something like that. Okay, so what is more important, I think, for at the moment, is to work on developing your answers. You need to give well-developed answers for part 3, much more than part 1. We've already mentioned this. Your answer structure will depend on the type of question you get asked, but I have developed a strategy that will enable you to answer most questions properly and ensure your answer is well developed. So what is my strategy? And before we get into this strategy, I just want to reiterate, I mentioned it briefly before, this is not suitable for every single type of question, okay? You have to answer the question specifically, and if they ask you to compare and contrast, do that. If they ask you a hypothetical question, use a conditional. But this is just an overall strategy that you'll be able to use for most questions. So the first one is answer the question. Very, very simple. So if they ask you a question, answer it. And then the second thing you need to do is explain your answer. So explain why you think that. Number 3, give examples to support your answer. So much like a task 2 main body paragraph, answer the question, our topic sentence, then our explanation, and then we use an example. and then show the other side or a concession. So for every topic, for everything in life, there are two sides to it. So normally your answer will cover one side, and then you want to briefly mention the other side. And think of it like a task 2 writing main body paragraph. So let me give you an example. If somebody said to me, in your country, do people respect the police? Okay, so I'm going to, or do you think people respect the police in general? So that's an idea that I need to talk about. So I'm going to answer the question first. That's going to be yes or no, very, very simply. Then I'm going to explain why I think yes or no. And then I'm going to give some examples to help support my answer. And then if I said yes, I'm going to show the no side. If I said no, then I'm going to show the yes side. And once you get into the rhythm of this and you get used to this strategy, questions become very, very easy, and you know how to structure them and develop them quite well. So if somebody asked me, do people respect the police? I would say, in my country, most people do respect the police. I would have to say that. The reason why they respect the police is because it's a very, very dangerous job. They put their life on the line, and they don't know if they're going to work that day, whether they'll come home to their loved ones, because there is quite a bit of crime where I live. So people do respect the fact that they might get killed or they might get injured. And people also respect the fact that they are keeping them safe from criminals. For example, there are quite a few drug dealers in the city that I live in. And the police regularly have to go into drug dealers' houses where they keep their drugs. And the drug dealers have weapons. They have knives. They have guns. So it is a very risky situation for the police to go into that area, to go into that house. And sometimes they do get stabbed or shot. There was one incident last week in our city where a policeman went into the house to try and catch a drug dealer, and the drug dealer had a very fierce dog, and the dog attacked him and mauled him, and it caused a little bit of injury. So they do respect, people do respect the fact that they are trying to keep the streets clean from these people and keep drugs off the street. However, some people don't really respect the police because inevitably in every police force there is some corruption, and there have been some stories in the past where police have stolen money from criminals or tried to extract money from people by saying that they were going to arrest them. But this is a very these incidents are few and far between. So you can see what I've done there. I've answered the question, yes, people do respect the police. Then I've explained why, because it's a dangerous job and because they protect the public. Then I've given examples, and I just made those examples up. Where I live, there are no drug dealers. There's very little crime where I live. I just made that up, and it's totally acceptable to do that. Say whatever helps you answer the question. And then I showed the other side. Where I live, again, there is no corruption that I know of, but I know that happens, so I just added that in. Don't think of it as lying or misleading anybody. All you're doing is putting on a performance. If you think that's lying, then Leonardo DiCaprio is lying every time he, makes a new movie. It's not lying. You're just performing for the examiner. So, will you be able to use that question for every single type of question? No. So if they said to you, what are the advantages and disadvantages of being a policeman? You're not going to answer it in that way. But what you would do is you would mention an advantage, and then you would explain why you think that's an advantage, and then you would give an example of why you think that's an advantage, and then you would talk about the disadvantage, and then you would explain why you think that is a disadvantage and give an example. And in that situation, you wouldn't have to give a concession because you've already done that. If somebody said to you, do people respect policemen or policewomen more than lawyers or less than lawyers? You're going to explain whether you think it's policemen more than lawyers or lawyers more than police, and then you're going to explain why and give examples. And then you might say, however, in certain situations it's the opposite. All right, so don't overcomplicate this. Don't, if you have any questions about this, let me know. But don't say, in this question, should we do this? Or this question, should you do that? Just look at the basic overarching principles of this strategy. It's answering the question, explaining it, giving examples, showing the other side if possible. That's all you really need to do. You don't have to follow it exactly, but this is helping you, give a very well developed answer. So, preparation. Now that you know what the common problems are, you know how to overcome the common problems, you know the common questions, and you have a strategy to answer these properly, you need to prep it. So get a partner to ask you questions and record your answers. So this is probably the best way. Get your spouse, get your friend, get your next door neighbor, whoever it is, give them some questions. They can just Google it on their phone, part 3 questions, and get them to ask you these questions and record them. Do this by yourself by looking at a list of real questions and record yourself. If you can't find someone, do it yourself. I don't think the doing it yourself one works as well, because what happens is you inevitably look at the questions before you start answering them, and your subconscious starts to process that information, and it's not really like a real exam, because in the real exam you're going to get really difficult questions, and they're going to not shock you, but you're going to have to get into the the process of staying very calm and answering questions as best you can, even when you don't understand them. So that's how to deal with them. And start off slowly and think about the type of question and the grammar and functional language needed to answer it. So if you're not very confident at all about part 3, what I would do is I would have your notes, I would have the grammar, I would have all the information that you need in front of you. I would get the person to ask you a question, and before answering it, I would look at the grammar, think about the question, write the question down even, and really think deeply about it. Start off your preparation very, very slowly. And then what you can do is you can take away your notes, you can start answering them more quickly, and start answering them more naturally. But don't try to start off at 60 miles an hour. If you were learning how to drive, the instructor wouldn't take you onto the motorway and tell you to start driving at 100 miles an hour immediately. What they would do is they would start off very, very slowly in a car park or something. So do the same with IELTS, and everything with IELTS like that. So in the next module, we have finished modules 1, 2, and 3. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with our vocabulary, grammar, all that stuff. So the next module is going to be just on vocabulary. Okay, hope that you enjoyed this module. Hope that it was useful, and I'll see you in the next one. And I'm very sorry that I, made a couple of mistakes, something wrong with my brain today. It's maybe too early in the morning and I need some coffee. But hopefully you understood everything, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.